Alrighty. Well, that's not super good camera quality, but here we are. All right, motherfuckers. It's been a long time. I've gotten older, which I could say a little wiser. However, I've had a lot of thoughts cross my mind lately. I think there's some issues that need to be addressed. I've been kind of watching a few things and paying attention to a few things and seeing kind of how things have unfolded, or rather, the lack thereof unfolding. So I've touched base a little bit, kind of played around, figured out okay, what's the real crux of why we're running into issues, right? And I think the barrier to entry, as far as any type of psychological type, is painful. And most people start their journey going down like the MBTI road, or they go down some other disc or some other format. And they say, hey, you know what? That's me, but I wish there was more because there's only like 4 boxes or 16 boxes or 8 boxes or whatever method that people choose to use and explore. But I think the challenge is that people are looking for something else, and they're looking for the variance within type, which I think is the big issue that I kind of want to address today. I don't plan on this being a super long video, but I do want to talk about that. So there's two like primary schools of thought. There's trait based typing, and there's type based typing. And trait based is, well, you exhibit a certain trait, and how much of that trait you exhibit, that kind of categorizes you as a type. I believe like Big Five or a few other big instruments use this trait based assessment. And then we get into type, which is people's behaviors, which are sort of trait based in themselves too. And we tend to type people in the sense of like, okay, here are the behaviors that this person's exhibiting. I'm going to assume that this is their type, but that's the problem. So how do we fix this? How do we actually get into the crux of what it is that we're actually um, using to type people? Well, I think that the main emphasis should be a like checking on motivations and values. And I've talked about this in the past, I think, to some extent. And then the style, the style that one goes about actually executing to achieve the motivations and the things that they value. So there's this kind of this triad that exists. So we tend to ignore, or rather, don't take into consideration when we think about psychological type. We don't take into consideration like cultural emphasis, environmental upbringing, education. We don't take intelligence into factor. Like you can kind of assume like when people have higher intelligence that they're actually, or they're becoming more self-aware, that they're like, okay, maybe I need to flex here, or maybe I need to stretch there. So they don't take that into consideration. So instead, it's like, oh, this person behaves a certain way, or likes this type of music, or likes this activity, then they must be this certain personality type, or they whatever, right? It's kind of dumb and it's rudimentary. So this is what discourages people to actually give this any credence at all, or people moving into the psychological community. So some people kind of dabble, they put their foot in it, and they're like, "Oh, here's what I'm enjoying, but as far as it goes, I got what I needed. All right, I'm out." And they tend to leave the community. Then there's the lifelong blood sucking addicts, which just kind of troll around the internet and watch tons of type videos and never actually contribute to anything, which is fine, right? Not everybody has to be a contributor, but they, well, like, oh, this person's this type. I'm going to type this person. I'm going to type that person, but they're not really contributing and shaping the knowledge base. And I think that's a problem in itself, right? Because they actually spread incorrect information on comments, and this is how you should look at it. This is how, I mean, and it's a lot of behavioral based typing. So when we look at someone's psyche, and it took me a while to get into this because I haven't talked about this in a long time, so I forgive this first 4.5, 5 minute prelude. But the core issue is that, sorry about that. I think that when we go back to the fundamentals, it's the psyche runs off of a very few limited set of things. And we start with what is kind of driving a person. It's a person's mission, right? It's something that a person is looking to put above themselves. It's something that someone serves, and oftentimes that's an ideal, or maybe it's God, or it's the universe, or whatever. Right? Purpose, mission. That's the direction. This is the thing that's worth more than one's life. A lot of times it's people's family. A lot of times it's that, and then other times it's like, hey, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's something that they yearn to find, or digging into that mission. But one thing that's for sure is also that the identity. That's the next step up, right? So kind of the mission is that God defines the person, whoever, whatever God they choose. And that might be someone's God, on the God they choose that for themselves, or that might be something that they escalate themselves above. Anyway, long story short, um, mission takes kind of that shapes the entire personality. Then you have this whole second step, right? It's identity. Who am I? Well, a lot of times people think who they are is the behaviors they exhibit, and that kind of shortcuts or short circuits the whole thing. So identity is that kind of that next step. And so who am I? So one thing is, when we're communicating with other people, this is why we get into typology in the first place, right? When we communicate with other people, what we're looking to do is take something that's in our mind and convey it in a way that someone can receive it. And they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, a video is worth 1,000 pictures, etc. Right? So we want to take this thought, this abstraction that's in our mind, and convey it in a way that someone can receive. So anyway, when we're listening to somebody and they use these statements like "I am," and so I am this. I'm a smoker. I'm a fat guy. I'm this. I'm a worker. I'm a professional. I'm a business person. Um, anyway, so the identity is the next kind of thing that people shape out, right? So what is the identity that somebody has? Then you move up the ladder here into something that's less significant on shaping one's personality, but also very, very significant, but less significant than the identity itself. It's values. What's important to an individual? And this is what really socionics personality type begins to really capture, right? Is what is important to this individual. So when I talk about the three triad that you can, or the triad that defines personality, what I'm talking about is values now, right? So, what are the values that one carries? What's important to an individual? This is how you actually get to type, is looking at values and looking at the style at which one goes about attaining their motivation. So, what is driving that? So, you have a series of values, then you move up into beliefs, right? And this is kind of the way that one believes they can attain that particular value set. So, this is what I value out of life versus what someone else may value out of life. So, then you move into beliefs. Beliefs, something that we hold to be true, doesn't necessarily mean it is true. And beliefs, we hear this in language a lot. I feel this way. I believe that's true, or that doesn't mean this, or this means that. And we get this like concept of what means what. So moving up below, above beliefs, we have skills. And skills are something that we exhibit, and it's something that can be seen. So skills is kind of the first level of what we can see. It's the deepest level of what we can see. The highest level is behavior. And so everybody can exhibit and observe a behavior, but that's where most people are spending their time typing. Individuals is looking at a behavior. This person is aggressive. Well, anybody can be aggressive. That doesn't indicate a type. Anybody can be upset. Anybody can be irritable. Anybody can be um, having a bad day. Anybody can be expressive at times. Anybody can be, doesn't necessarily mean they value it. It just comes out. And it comes out as a result of the other things that I discussed before. So when we're looking at assessing a personality type, we have to assess the deeper things. Okay. So what does one value, and what are the motivations? Right. If somebody values this, doesn't necessarily mean they want to go after that. They think it's important, but maybe that's not their skill set. Maybe that's not the area that they really think they can add value to. But other people who share those values can add values there too. And that's where you get kind of a tribe of people working together to accomplish a similar goal. right? How can they complement each other? How can they add emphasis to each other? How can they actually boost each other and attain that goal of whatever it is? And then the style, the unique way the person goes about doing that. So they may agree on this is the motivation, they may agree on the value set, but then there's a style that one goes about in doing that. So when we look at personality type, it's about framing it in a way that we actually can see someone's shell. What are they presenting? Okay, here's what they're presenting, but what goes beneath that, what's underneath the surface, that's what's going to give you a good concept on personality type. So taking a test, most people don't know themselves that well. So they take a test and they say, oh, that's me. Or they fall consequence to the Barnum effect and they read something and they go, that's me. Well, is it? Well, I mean, a lot of people can exhibit. You read a type description and what you see is a description with a bunch of text that explains how you feel about things. Well, I think in most of those things, you're going to find something that you similarly agree with. And you're like, okay, I agree with that. I agree with that. I kind of agree with that. Maybe not so much of that, but you know what? I lean more that way, so I'm gonna go along with that. Well, the problem with that is you're not capturing the essence of a type. You're not capturing actually what motivates that type, what the value set of that type is, and more importantly, you get caught up in these different terms and what they mean and all the nomenclature. And then you're like, dude, I got to spend 2 years trying to figure out actually how to communicate with people. Then you spend so much time trying to communicate with people that you actually are so deep into this shit that you forgot how to communicate with people because you've been studying this shit in your spare time the whole time. And you're like, oh, fuck, I forgot how to talk to somebody. And that's the irony about it at all, is you can spend so much time studying this shit that you can actually lose essence of or I think people often lose essence of like actually how to communicate with somebody without staring them down and being like, what's this person's type? So they sit there and start typing somebody in their brain instead of listening to the person they're actually talking to. Right? It's like, oh, I wonder what this person's saying. They must be this type. And the next thing you know is you're so self-absorbed, you're not even able to listen to somebody effectively. And how the hell are you going to come up with their type? So I think that's quite funny to me, is that we can actually counter and like contradict what we're trying to accomplish simply by chasing it in itself. Um, and I think there is something very painful about this process. So when you're actually spending time to type somebody, the first step is to really understand what drives that person and their values. What's important to that individual. As I went back and I looked at a few type videos, I was seeing like mistakes that I've made in quite a few videos. I also saw a bunch of mistakes that other people made. And I'm just like, man, that was so obvious. It was like, that was the right there. That was the thing that we could have used to figure out what the hell's going on with this person underneath the surface, not the behaviors they're presenting, but really what motivates this individual. Right. Do you consider yourself good at this or bad at that? Well, you might have never been exposed to that. So how the hell would you actually be good at it? You might have a natural knack for it, but you may not be good at it. Who knows, right? So let me pause for a second. I'm gonna read some of these things. Emailed Anthrax, the issue is the mind is ever flowing and adaptable, while a standard mind template appears to exist. They will not achieve 100% every time, since certain traits can be either managed or nullified on a few fronts. 100% agree. That's the problem, is people are observing traits. They're looking at certain things that, like I have moments where I don't want to fucking talk to a soul. And then I have moments where I just want to like really be involved with people. I personally get charged up by people for the most part, but sometimes it's just people I don't want to freaking deal with right now because there's just more shit than there needs to be. And it's just like, okay, dude, I don't want to talk about this right now. This shit is either above my head. It's not the area that makes me feel like freaking energized and ready to party. It's the energy that makes me feel like, dude, I'm going to go jump off a bridge. So stop talking about that or I'm going to walk away. Um, and then there's other parts where, things change. So if you observe me in the workplace, you're going to get a different version of me than if you observe me here or if you observe me over there, because I'm human and I adapt. So one of the things that we have to do is we have to get referential, good understanding of someone all around, and we have to get underneath the surface. We have to figure out what's happening in that person's mind. We have to figure out what are the consistent themes over the course of their life, not just, hey, here's what this person's in the midst of a depression, so what type are they, right? And I think that's another issue that Trey and I have been really working through, is looking at influence and over longer periods of time. And I think the big missing piece here, of course, is cultural upbringing. Here in America, we tend to be very independent focused, regardless of what type you are. So, um, let's see. Can you explain to me what and how is Socionics? Don't know this system. Socionics is basically it's just another cross cut of classical Jungian dichotomies, but it's actually more advanced. I find it to be more internally consistent than the other spinoffs, which is like MBTI and things like that. I believe it to be a more refined and effective model to capture psychological disposition and psychological traits than even Jung's definitions. Although I think Jung had a deeper insight into understanding one's shadow and dealing with ego issues and actually healing people. I think Socionics is a good tool to model one's psyche. So, um, so I'm an INTP and MBTI. What would I be in Socionics? Who knows? Couldn't tell you. And you may not even be an INTP. I mean, MBTI is so inconsistent. It's the problem with MBTI is it's self-reported, which it operates off the assumption that one knows themselves, which is very unfortunate because most people don't understand themselves. They don't even know their own motivations. Over the years, I've probably coached 300 salespeople, and I think, and yeah, it's a limited data set because I've worked with mostly salespeople, but I've also had other direct reports outside of salespeople. But salespeople is the biggest bulk of it. And I've seen people from all kinds of cuts of freaking cloth, right? They're all different people, and I would say the majority of those people do not understand why they do what they do or why they don't do what they're asked to do. So that's really, really important. As I talked about in the beginning of this video, I think the big challenge is that they're not understanding where the behavior is coming from. It's like, okay, I have this behavior, and then they identify with that behavior. Okay, I am a wallflower. Well, that's an identity statement that's capturing what your behavior is and then pinning it on your identity, and instead of understanding the motivation. Maybe you're a wallflower because you're secretly plotting something and you're trying to manipulate somebody, or maybe you want attention because it stands out and everybody else is doing what everybody else is doing and it's making you stand out like a sore thumb, which will attract a certain type of person to want to go crack the mystery. Or maybe you're a wallflower because you're just shy and you don't know how to socialize. Or, I mean, you really have to figure out what is driving the behavior instead of just identifying it, which I think is a big problem. So anyway, back to MBTI. Yeah, it's just super inconsistent. It's based on dichotomies, which they've tried to back with JCF, which is Jungian cognitive functions. They've tried to back it and say, okay, well, this is the theoretical model that we don't necessarily want to assign as truth. We're just going to put it as this is type dynamics, and we're going to move that off to the side. We're going to focus on the dichotomies of E versus I, S versus N, T versus F, and J versus P. And that's how they do it. Basically, it's turned into a trait assessment instead of a type assessment. So it's like, oh, do you demonstrate more extroversion than introversion? Well, if you demonstrate more extroversion, then you're an ENFJ. If you demonstrate more introversion, then you're an INFJ. And that is, well, not exactly, because that person who may be an ENFJ can still experience social awkwardness or social discomfort for whatever reason. Maybe they just got their life torn apart and they're feeling introverted because they're depressed. And that's where you get this type change. Oh, well, 2 years ago, I was INFJ, and now 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I was this, and 2 years ago, I was that. And now I don't know what I am, and I have this type crisis. Whereas if you look at the themes and you understand what's happening beneath the surface and you really take a deep dive into seeing like, okay, this is what's important to this person. This is what this person values. This is the way that this person goes about solving these particular motivations or attaining these motivations. How does this person go about do it? Do they do it in a inquisitive way? Like, is it questioning? Is it acquisitive as in I want to accumulate, or is it taking on more responsibility, or is it actually normalizing and deferring responsibility and taking responsibility off oneself, right? Or is the person focused? What is the method in which they go about doing it, right? Does this person believe that things are going to get them there, or people going to get them there, or concepts are going to get them there? That's where you really find out what someone's personality type is. you start digging them. Then you have to make every box check. They're like, well, there's some deviation in type. Well, there's deviation, yes. Right. When we look at a type, it's a box, and you may fall somewhere in that spectrum, right? You may be like this, but there's no such thing as being in six boxes at once. You're somewhere in that spectrum. You may demonstrate that. And that's that little trait variation inside a type, but values don't change very often. And so values take a long time to change, or they take some serious impact to your life to have to see the values that change. Whereas motivations tend to not change. And that's another thing that's evident, is that one's motivations may say that this is important to me, and this is what's motivating me to act on this particular thing that's important to me. And that doesn't change very often. Now, the feeling or the emotion of motivation may change, but the motivation generally doesn't change in itself. If you have a desire to accumulate wealth, uh, in a true desire, not some passing fleeting thing because you saw a cool movie, then sure. All right. So, and the style, the way that one goes about it naturally, not forced. Okay. So when I'm in the workplace and when I'm managing direct reports, I have to stretch a lot, right? I can't just be myself talking to everybody. It's not effective to not be flexible. And that's really important. So when you're in a workplace, you have a goal, and whatever that goal may be. And I wish to motivate other people and get them to perform, because I'm fucking tired. I'm gonna be honest. I've been carrying so many damn plates my whole life. Some were by choice and most were by force. And it's like, dude, I'm going to help you, help me, help you. So this is kind of this quid pro quo thing. So I need to make sure that you're motivated, on board, and engaged with what we're doing. So I have to flex my style. If you were to type me on how I flex my style, that would change based on who I'm speaking with. So there's that, right? All right. Let's move down a little bit. So people need to stop limiting themselves based on their type. People who have the same type can be very different due to their experience and their life story. Yes, and yes, and yes. 100%. And also their upbringing, their culture, what country they're from. Like if you look at some of the Eastern countries, it's forced on obedience and academic excellence. Intelligence may be a big factor, and something that they compete for is the performers. Right. And in the United States, it's more of like, well, if you're independent and you go against the grain, then you're seen as more esteemed. So those who rebel in school are often more esteemed, unless you're a top performer like valedictorian in high school. Then you move on to an Ivy League college or some prestigious college. That's the other path, right? But whereas in some foreign countries, it's much more about what job or career. And you may find that, that career is saturated with people who are similar, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's actually your natural disposition. It's something that you've obligated yourself to because of some other standard. If you have a value on family, for example, someone may type you as an ethical type. Your value is extremely focused on family. They may say, well, that's an introverted ethical type. Yes, there's those cultural effects. Me being an ENFJ, I don't fit the mold of what is said about ENFJs online. Well, you're probably right, because those descriptions suck, and so do the people that describe them. Oh my God, you look a little different than when you started. Yes, I'm old as hell. I'm getting gray. I got some gray hairs. I've lost some hair. I got glasses I think I've had glasses since I've done this, but yeah, I'm getting a little old here. So uh, same as an INFP, I act more like a textbook ISTP or INFJ of different environments. So I don't know how people type people they don't know well. Well, yeah, that's the thing, is like, you really can. It's just behavioral based. There sometimes I used to say vibe typing was dumb. Sometimes it has its merits, because there are people who, when you see the same value set being shared, and then the style in which they go about attaining whatever it is they're motivated to attain, then yeah, you can get a general feel, but it doesn't. You should question the accuracy, and I don't think you can be confident in that. And one thing that Trey and I have done quite a bit is, we are very open to question each other's assessments, even our initial assessments, where we go through these longer processes and we question quite a bit. Okay, why do you think that? And most of the time we get to the same conclusion, but there are times when we differ, and then we have to take a step back and be like, okay, how do we reach this, and how do we actually reconcile this? There was a type session that we did fairly recently. It wasn't broadcasted, so you don't get to see it. But there was one we did fairly recently where we essentially disagreed, and then we spent days. I mean, I'm talking not like we didn't spend like 8 hours a day, but we spent probably a week really hashing out the inconsistencies with the model. We had to make the model fit in order to reach a conclusion. Um, and both him and I have a lot of confidence in the model, so it's not like we couldn't reach it. It's just we missed something, and we knew we missed something, and we said, okay, we have to come up with a series of questions to make this fit, or we can't reach a conclusion, and we'd have to label it as inconclusive. And that's usually the error of the interviewer, the diagnostician, and not so much the person that is presenting themselves or being interviewed or diagnosed. So that's I think that it requires a certain level of humility to type people effectively. um, I think it requires a certain level of curiosity and understanding and listening versus and listening to kind of your own internal effectiveness. Like, okay, I know my own bias, right? I know the things I'm listening for, I know the things that pop up, I know the feeling, and I have to question that. I'm like, okay, this why is this appearing for me? uh So, emailed Anthrax says, and the fact that core motivation doesn't change is why I've rejected a few systems. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at here. And I don't think I have least seen anybody online. And it's not like I'm playing on YouTube watching a bunch of type videos either. So maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't think I've seen anybody really go down this road of explaining one's motivations. And we all these type systems allude to it, but it's like, okay, what do you find yourself doing? What kind of hobbies do you like? What kind of things do you enjoy? And there's different reasons why people enjoy those things. There's different, and you have to find the reasons to make sense of it. You can't just assume that because somebody likes sports, they're a ESTP, right? You can't just assume that somebody who works in construction is a freaking ESTP, or you can't just assume. And you may find that those types could be overrepresented in some of those professions, which is true, right? Um, so anyway, Kimberly says, do you think we can change our personality type to another? Or do you think we stay the same? Well, it depends on how you're going about typing. The way that I think type should be used is to understand yourself and your who you are. And I think that it's also your core values, which don't change very often. And it's your motivations, which don't change very often, and it's your method in going about those things that don't change very often. I believe it's very inherent. I don't believe it changes. But based on how we're typing in this type community today, yeah, your type can change because one day I can like the Chiefs and the next day I like the Steelers. Now I'm a fucking asshole, right? So my type changes because my team changed. So yeah, I don't think that you can have a consistent type if you follow the idea that you're behavior based typing, which I think is a big issue. And I see it quite a bit. And people watch these stupid fucking videos online, right? They see somebody like me talking and they're just like, oh, well, this person's this type. Well, you got you got one fucking sliver. You got you got me presenting to a camera. I'm literally talking to myself. I literally don't even see another face right now. I'm just fucking, what is it, stream of consciousness. And so you can't just type this. You have to understand what it is that's motivating me to make this fucking video, right? You have to understand what is happening beneath the surface, and then you start understanding how I'm going about doing it and why I'm going about doing it and what's important to me. Why am I doing this? Those are the questions you ask, and I don't think that changes. I really don't. I may stop doing this like I've done for the past few years, and I may find something else to do, but the values haven't changed, right? It's the things I care about haven't changed. In fact, they've become more enhanced as I've gotten older. They've become more clear. It's not the opposite, that it's just changing into something else. And I think that's, sometimes we learn a new method of doing something. Sometimes we learn a new way, or something that we've done doing is wrong, which is fine. Wrong in the sense of that it's going against what we believe or philosophically think is correct or right. So yeah, I do think we tend to remain the same. But if you're typing like most jackasses who look at behavior, and I say jackasses in the sense that it's the lack of questioning. I found myself battling for years, a few years ago, of differentiation between systems. And I wrote a few on my website about this pan Jungian cherry picking method of typing, right? Everybody's kind of developed their own system. And I really pretty much wanted to die on that hill at that time, because I felt that it was so obvious why that was silly. And but it wasn't obvious. It wasn't obvious to them, and I couldn't make it obvious no matter how I portrayed it. And I still think it's obvious, but it's just there's a piece that I didn't understand about the audience that could not receive what I was saying. So it was difficult to convey, but I still have the same opinion on it, which is, yeah, there's clear lines, and they can't be mixed. You can't just cherry pick what you like from one system to another. And I'm not going to dive too much into that conversation, but I do feel that is something that I am still very convicted about. But I think the big shift that Trey and I have really been working on the back end, which is why we haven't been around for a while. I think Trey has popped up now and then, but um, is really shifting, giving it a way to understand it without the nomenclature, and understanding that it's really based on two real components, right? And those two real components are the style you go about doing something and the things that you value. If you look at those two, you will find your type inevitably. And I can explain that in a different video, but it's very simple. You look at those two things, you're going to find your type. You don't have to, but once you do that, you have to validate it, right? You have to go, okay, I believe and I hypothesize that I am this type. Let me see now, and this is what Socionics will do, is go that next step deeper, and they'll go, okay, how does this fit? How does this fit as base pragmatism, or how does this fit as creative senses, right? Or creative SI or base TE? How does this fit? And then once you see that it actually does pan out without you altering the definition, that's when you know you're pretty confident in your type. My goal has always been, when I work with somebody, it's always been for them to walk away being able to defend why they believe that they're their type, and they're being able to put up an argument against others who say you're not that. Because inevitably, if somebody's using a different method to type that person, then they're going to challenge the type that you've reached, because they have different definitions, they have a different method, they're looking at behaviors, and they're looking at things that are constantly in flux. So what I'm saying is, don't reject the system, reject the practitioner. And then you start realizing, okay, great, this person isn't going about doing it. And I think, again, that kind of core axiom of most of these type systems is the fucking interviewer knows them, or the interviewee knows themselves. And I think that's wrong, right? I think you should challenge people. A good diagnostician or a good coach is going to ask questions that actually challenge an individual. And if somebody tells me that that's how they feel, and then they say something that contradicts that 2 minutes later, or seemingly contradicts that, I'm going to expand on that. There's no way I'm going to let that just slide and be like, oh, okay. I'm going to figure out, well, how does this coexist? Because they can't, in my mind, and you've got to be able to explain how they do coexist. And if you don't, then we're going to run into a problem. And I don't want to wind up inconclusive. And I want you to be confident, as I am, that we've reached the same conclusion. So anyway, that's where I'm at with it. I did ramble a lot in this video. I had to warm up. This is the first damn video I've done in, fuck, how long? 3 years, 2 years, 3 years? I don't know. It's been a long time. So yeah, I mean, it's there, whatever. But let's see. NMC 1992. Yeah, man, it's I don't remember you specifically, but hey, you know what? I'm sure we talked at some point or another, and thank you. Everything's good. We're moving ahead and we're charging forward. A lot of things have changed. Life's been kind of crazy. I've been busy like hell. I've been waking up at probably four to between 4 and 5:30 most days of the week. Go to bed around 9:30, 10 most days. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. A lot of shit going on. A lot of things to do. Try to keep up with at this point. In other news, if you give a shit, one of the things that's been really freaking interesting is just like all the things that I've come across in the past few years from a mentorship standpoint, business standpoint. Some of the things I really want to share with you guys at some point going forward. There's a lot of things to really hash out. I don't know if this platform is going to be the platform that I'm going to continue to produce content, or maybe I'll just write articles because I'll probably be doing shit at 4 in the morning. So we'll see. We'll see where that goes. Anyway, so in conclusion, overall, if I were to sum up the entire point of this video, so hopefully we'll get somebody who's generous enough to tag this, say conclusion here. The summary is that there's a big problem in the psychological type area. And that big problem is that we're using the wrong method to type. We're not clear on definitions, which I've been fighting that battle for years. And we're not understanding how to dig deeper and find the things that are constant in an individual instead of the things that are in flux. We're paying attention to the noise instead of the signal, which is consistent. And those are the things that we're really looking for, is to extract the consistency from someone and to identify what we can rely on anytime we see that person in any environment, what we can consistently rely on. So that consistency is really important. So we want to extract that from an individual and say, okay, what is consistent in this person? They may give you all kinds of inconsistent answers. One minute they may be doing this, or inconsistent behaviors. One day they're this, one day they're that. I mean, I had my moments. So there's that. And I think that there's the lack of effective challenging that's happening in the type community. So there's not a lot of people pushing and challenging each other. And I mean, challenging, not like that's not your type. Well, you don't know shit, right? If you're a good diagnostician or an interviewer, you can't necessarily say somebody's not a type unless you've really spent the time to dig under their motivations. But you also can't take things at face value. If somebody tells you something, assume it not to be true until you can prove it otherwise. It sounds really freaking cynical, but I think you're better off having the assumption that a person does not know themselves than the other way around. If you assume that the person knows themselves, you're really going to tie yourself in knots because things aren't going to make sense. And this is where we get into this lazy typing methodology. If you have any questions about what I'm saying, feel free to post. I will reply in here. So I'm happy to open the floor up to you guys, see if there's any questions. But going back. So yes, that's another big problem, right? Is that assumption that people don't know themselves. So they'll read something and they'll find something that validates themselves, which is another issue, right? You have fucking behaviors that are not serving you or someone else that you care about or something that you care about. And you're justifying such shit behaviors because you're too damn lazy to fix it. You're too fucking lazy to fix your problem. So you find a validation tool, which I think is another misuse of personality type. In fact, you should look at what your biases are and realize that your biases are actually your biggest roadblock into establishing the success that you want in your life in whatever area that you choose. For me, one of my biggest Achilles heels has always been my rapid desire to acquire more. And it's acquire more in material, acquire more control, acquire more interest, acquire more understanding. It's always been acquisition, right? So it's rapidly choosing between different things instead of staying on the single path. And So one period in my life, or one saga in my life, I'm heavily focused on fitness. Another saga of my life, I'm heavily focused on reading and enhancing my brain. Another one, I'm heavily focused on meditating because I want to fucking learn how to float. I mean, those things, right? It's like, okay, how do you tackle all this at once? And the key is actually the opposite, and that is becoming disciplined. And as much as I hate having to do the same thing or work on the same thing, even though my mind's wanting to do all these other things, then that is the tool that I've used to really actually attain some success in my life, is to create discipline in my life and go, okay, you want to do all these things, fucking pick one and stick with the damn thing. So I think that's really really important. Is once you identify what your biases are and the problems that you have, you actually can make the effort to change those things if you're actually focused on what it is you want. Maybe you just want to chill, and if you want to chill in life, what's going to give you the place to chill? Because one of my biggest motivations is chilling. Like most people would not know that, like seeing how I perform in my life. Most people would not know my competitive desire, how I like to compete. I enjoy competition. I enjoy competing. I really do. But behind all that, what really is underneath the surface is the desire, and not the deepest motivation, but a big one is the desire to do whatever the fuck I want. That's really what it is. It's like if I want to freaking chill and sit on a beach for 6 days, that's what I want to do, and I don't want anything telling me that I don't. So why do you think I bust my ass for so long? So I can have the freedom of choice to go chill on a beach for fucking 2 months, 7 months, whatever I choose to do. So that's a big underlying motivation, right? Or maybe I want to work on something big, or maybe I want to work on something impactful. So most people think they see the behavior, but they don't understand the motivation. Goes back to my original point. The God Realm says, do you find it hard to talk to psychologists about MBTI? A lot are very dismissive of the functions. Well, I don't really talk to much psychologists, but I don't think it's been accepted in a lot of psychological schools, and it's not really empirically verifiable, which a lot of the data from those schools are, and it doesn't have necessarily a political agenda behind it, so it's not really buzzy. So yeah, I would imagine that it would be difficult to convey it, but I think it's if you get away from the concept of behavior and you start talking about consistency, you can label people quite easily, right? I mean, they do it all the time. You take a psychiatrist and they look at the DSM and they say, you meet the 6 out of these 8 criteria, then you're diagnosed with this. It's no different than that if you look at the constants, but you got to look at the constants. And most people are looking at the variables. They're seeing certain behaviors and they're going, okay, well, there's this. And no wonder why psychologists are dismissive of it, because it's like, well, you only in MBTI specifically is a problem, because it's like, well, there's only 4 functions. Well, no, there's not. There's 8. How do you use the other 4? Um, so yeah, I would imagine it's difficult, but I don't really talk about MBTI too much. Uh, so anyway, consistency is what we need to look for in type. Motivation strengths are inclined to stay the same, but behavior and results you produce can vary. Yes, exactly. That's exactly the point I'm conveying here. Edwin says, any thoughts about typing systems and spirituality, the relationship? Yes. It would it would shock me um, to find a specific correlation between certain types and spirituality. But before we can really dive down that road, I think the important thing is being able to see the being able to define what spirituality is. And I think that the value set of the 4 quadras in Socionics would really define each depiction of spirituality in a little bit of a different way. They would add a unique spin on it. And I think that you have to define that before you can create any correlation. So, how you define spirituality is really important. If I were to define it in the way that I think it means, is finding your role in the universe and finding out that you are a part of the universe and the universe is part of you and you're all one and the same. And then it's the purpose. What is the purpose of you being here? What is the meaning of you being here? And what I have come to discover is that it's really um, it's really the you getting to explore yourself, the universe exploring itself through you and through unique individual experiences. Otherwise, if you're everything, then you can't be observed in a short way or a short manner of speaking. Edwin also said her argument sounded legit. I just haven't had too much time to think about it. I don't know what argument that is, but I mean, could be. I don't know whose argument we're talking about here, but anyway, so there's a lot of things to cover. I would imagine that as I have these thoughts, I might make make a video or two, but there's a lot to discover, a lot to write about. I'm working on a new facelift for for Socionics. I even hate the name. The name sounds dorky. It sounds like some video game that nerds play in their mom's basement. So I'm going to put a different layer on it, and I actually have put a different layer on it. I'm just working out terminology now, so that it's easy to understand, and really working with, like I said, the core consistent things, right? The things that really stand out. I don't want to stick to these terms, TEFI, unless you're really trying to learn how to diagnose and identify type, then there's that. But otherwise, I don't think I value those things. I think those things are really like between other typologists. I love using those terms because you know exactly what you're talking about. But if you're trying to get people as a whole to understand, and people that have not been in this community, you start using these acronyms, people are going to be like, fuck you, you're crazy. I don't want to talk about this anymore because there's too many damn letters. And what the hell are you even saying? So the complexity of it is far too advanced. And it's years and years of study to really understand the nuance of it. So it starts with the important things, which is who are you? What are your biases? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And how effective do they make you do? How effective are you with those things in the role that you're playing? And that role could be a father, could be a mother, could be a brother, could be a son, could be a daughter, could be a business person, could be an aunt, uncle, could be a social club, whatever role you're playing there. It could be any kinds of thing, right? A team player, a teammate, a coworker, whatever role that you're playing. How do your strengths and weaknesses or your biases and the things that you're naturally skilled at have an impact on what they cause you to feel and think. So, all right. A lot of rambling. I probably could have done this in 5 minutes, but I kind of turned this on and didn't even know it was on for the first few seconds. But anyway, we'll start streamlining it as I get more rehearsed on doing videos again. It's just been a while. So hopefully you all got your questions out. Whoever watches this, I'll check the comments at some point if you're not watching it live. Thank you all. Hope you all have a good night. Talk to y'all later. Take care.